What's up, everyone? Welcome to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and I just played in my first ever Warhammer 40k tournament. So this was a local 2,000-point Eternal War format event. Unfortunately, not ITC. I was hoping for ITC format because I think the missions are a little bit more balanced, but we were playing Eternal War from the 2018 chapter-approved book. I brought my Tyranids, and since my last battle report, which was basically my first game of 8th edition 40k, I've played a lot of games, I've leveled up quite a bit, and I've really refined my Tyranids list. Unfortunately, it's not quite optimized yet. I was hoping to play Hive Guard in this tournament. Unfortunately, I ordered them from my local game store, which is typically a big mistake because, of course, they didn't come in on time. I didn't get them to play for the tournament, so instead I brought a unit of warriors. So I'll run through my list real quick, give you guys a rundown. I had 2 battalion detachments. The first battalion was a Kraken detachment that featured the Swarm Lord and a winged Hive Tyrant with heavy venom cannon. That Hive Tyrant also got the Chameleonic Mutation Relic every round, so he was -1 to hit with ranged attacks. That detachment also has 2 units of 20 Gene Stealers, Scything Talons, and a couple Acid Maws in there, and 1 unit of 26 Termagants, 24 Devourers, and 2 Flesh Boar guys just to eat shots. The reason that those guys were in there is because the heavy support slot for that battalion is a Trigon Prime. So the idea here is that typically I played a lot of the games with the Devourer Gaunts, and they are very good when they, typically when they can get 2 rounds of shooting in with single-minded annihilation, the stratagem to make them shoot twice, they can put out an enormous number of attacks and really just kill a bunch of stuff. Unfortunately, my opponents typically know that too, so they shoot them and only toughness 3, 6-up save. The whole unit gets wiped out really quickly, and that is an expensive unit. So the Trigon Prime is there to pop up from the ground, bring in all of those little Termagants with him, and shoot a bunch of people really a lot. The reason that the Trigon Prime and the Termagants are in the Kraken detachment is that the Trigon Prime can potentially deep strike up within 6 inches of the Swarm Lord, and then the Swarm Lord can Hive Commander him to move so he can get a good charge off the first turn he comes in. That's the idea there. My other detachment is a Jormungandr detachment. Now, I've been playing a lot of games with Hive Fleet Kronos. I did play with Hive Guard, like I said. The Kronos is very strong, and since I was going to play them, I decided to take Jormungandr because the +1 save, essentially, being in cover with everybody as long as I don't run, it seems really strong. So I have a Neurothrope, which is going to be my Warlord in the detachment with a Synaptic Linchpin, so it's a bigger synapse range. 2 units of Rippers. They typically deep struck every game just to hold objectives. 1 big unit of Warriors. I think I had 5 Warriors there. Those guys have a 3+ save with the Jormungandr ability, so they can sort of wander around the middle of the table, kind of shrug off a lot of small shooting. They typically get blown up pretty quick, but the unit's only 125 points, so I don't really care that much. And the Trigon Prime buffing them up to a bunch of 3+ to hit heavy bolters is not too bad. And last but not least, 3 Carnifexes. We have 1 melee Carnifex, 2 Scything Talons on that guy, and 1 double Brainleech Devourer Carnifex, so 24 shots out of that dude, and then 1 with a heavy Venom Cannon and Scything Talons. Those 2 ranged attack Carnifexes have enhanced senses, so 3+ to hit, and then all 3 of them have Spore Cyst, so they're -1 to hit with ranged attacks. So outside of the Swarm Lord and the Trigon, obviously, which is usually not on the table, all of my my monstrous creatures are -1 to hit, and the Swarm Lord can usually hide. He is kind of small. So, ranged attacks going into those guys is a little tough. The Winged Hive Tyrant's so fast, he can usually, dodge out of range or behind cover or something like that. And the Carnifexes, they're -1 to hit, they have a 2+ save, and they don't degrade. So they have 8 wounds, and until you take out all 8 wounds, they don't really care about taking damage. So those guys actually were surprisingly good, and I think I'm going to play Jormungandr a lot in the future. Kronos was awesome to deny psychic powers, but with the stratagem, but it didn't come up every game, and the 2+ armor save really is a huge impact on those Carnifexes. Really keeps them around for a long time, and I think we'll see that in these games. So the tournament was 3 games, and like I said, I wasn't playing the list that I really wanted to. On top of that, it's kind of a big tournament, at least from my perspective. There were 20 people playing, selection of pretty good players from the local community. So I was really worried about how well I was going to do, especially being so new to the edition. So my goal going into the weekend was to win 1 game. I wanted to win 1 game. Let's get into the games. Let's see how I did. So round 1. I get paired up against Steve, and he brings out his tray. He jumps a bunch of Eldar flyers out of the table, and my heart sinks a little bit. I figure this is going to be a tough game. So he throws down an Eldari list, mostly Craft World Eldar, with a Blackheart detachment for Agents of Vect with 3 Razor Wing jet fighters in there as well for anti-infantry. I won't go over the entire list, but the gist of it was there were, I think 8 Eldar flyers. There were a big unit of scatter leaders of jet bikes, Farseer and Autark, 3 units of Rangers, excuse me, and 2 units of swooping hawks, all sitting in the webway, waiting to deep strike in on objectives. Now, unfortunately, it's a bit of a tough matchup for me, and the scenario was 4 pillars. So I was kind of excited because my opponent didn't have a lot of troops choices, which are the only thing that could score 4 pillars. So I was hoping I could get him on the objective, since those flyers obviously don't control objectives. They suck at objectives, honestly. Until I remembered that 4 pillars unfortunately has kill more as a secondary objective. So every round you kill more units than your opponent does, you get 1 victory point. So I think without that, I had a very good shot of rolling over this list because it really couldn't score objectives. But with that, unfortunately, my opponent's going to be able to take my list apart. Fortunately, I do have a lot of short range shooting, a ton of shots that can get around those -1 to hit on the flyers. So here we can see my deployment. My opponent won the roll to go first, so I ended up taking the first turn, which is a little tough. I deployed a lot of stuff in deep strike. I put the Winged Hive Tyrant, the Trigon, and all the Death Spitter Gaunts, as well as 1 unit of Rippers to come in later and score objectives. Those were all in reserve, hoping to be able to stop my opponent from killing all my big threats early and potentially get a round of shooting with the Death Spitter Termagants on a juicy unit like the Scatter Leaders Jet Bike, something like that. Hopefully be able to take out my opponent's ground forces before he totally wipes me out. So my opponent going first screams in with all the flyers. Unfortunately, I don't really have a place to hide the Swarm Lord, so he gets picked on immediately and taken out. Obviously, that's a great move from my opponent. With the Swarm Lord on the table, the Gene Stealers are a huge menace for him, so they can, double move, go in, kill all of the Scatter Laser Jet Bikes probably pretty easily, and, really put a ton of pressure on my opponent's objectives. Now, unfortunately, without him, it's a little tough, but he did take a lot of firepower to take down, so I took most of my opponent's shooting to kill him. The unit of Scatter Laser Jet Bikes blew up a unit of Gene Stealers, took a lot of them out. But fortunately, the scatter lasers don't have an AP value, and I was hiding behind the wall there on the left-hand side in cover. So I did save a lot of those Gene Stealers, and they ended up running behind the building to score that objective for the rest of the game. Now, my turn, I was able to put a lot of pressure on my opponent's Razor Wings. I decided to focus fire them down because they have the most firepower. They're able to kill the most models each turn, and that's really what I'm worried about with, bringing a ton of models in. So between Smites and the double Brain Leech Carnifex, shooting at them, I think I brought one down to like 2 wounds or something like that. All my volume of firepower, not as much damage as I hoped I could do. But after losing a bunch of models in the first round, I did okay. The Gene Stealer was mostly hunkered down and hoped they could make a bunch of saves. And I was keeping the Rippers back there next to the Neurothrope, so my opponent wasn't able to target him down easily and slay the Warlord. On my opponent's second turn, he focus fired down my Carnifexes. He was able to kill the melee Carnifex as well as the Venom Cannon Carnifex. Fortunately for me, the Jormungandr High Fleet bonus kept my Brainleech Devourer Carnifex pretty safe, actually. He rolled a lot of saves. The -1 to hit was kind of confounding my opponent. He had to guide in order to get, reasonable hits through. And the 2+ save against a lot of, very low or no AP weapons was really keeping him alive. So he ended up surviving that turn on 3 wounds. So my second turn, my reserves come in immediately. The Winged Hive Tyrant drops down within a charge range of 2 of the flyers there, Crimson Hunter, Exarch, as well as Razor Wing as well. I also drop in the Trigon and all of the Devour Gaunts. Now you notice not all the Devour Gaunts were there, and that's because my opponent used Forewarned on the Scatter Laser Bikes. Because the Farseer is right in front of them, they're able to shoot units that come in through Deep Strike. Now, I'm not going to lie, I had forgotten about this when I deep struck in. I remembered at the start of the game, and then as soon as I deep struck in, and I saw my opponent. Oh, I could get a kill off on the Farseer and take him out. That'd be awesome. So everybody dropped in. My opponent goes, oh, you use Forewarned, and that was stupid of me. Now in hindsight, there is no range limit on Forewarned. You just have to be next to the Farseer. And there isn't really a place on the table. There's no line of sight blocking terrain. It essentially isn't anywhere on the table that I can hide from those Scatter Laser Jet Bikes with the Devourer Gaunts. So in hindsight, had I had to make this move again, I absolutely would have. I would have dropped those guys down for sure. But thinking about it afterwards, I think the play would have been to just deploy the Devourer Gaunts. Now, my opponent can shoot them on turn 1, but that means it's Gene Stealers he's not shooting at. Potentially, that's like the Swarm Lord he's not shooting at. Flyers have to come onto my side of the table in order to keep moving. And so that short 18-inch range on those guns is probably still going to do a lot of damage. And if my opponent doesn't shoot at them, I'm shooting, 70 shots, potentially shooting twice at those flyers every turn. So those Scatter Laser Bikes, you're going to have to take a turn of shooting to hit them anyway. I just gave it to them free by deep striking in. So in hindsight, shouldn't have deep struck those guys in, should have just deployed them normally. Possibly the same with the Hive Tyrant. I was hoping the Swarm Lord would be able to survive 1 round. I could drop the Hive Tyrant in, get a double move with him, and take out a flyer. But he ended up just dropping down and not really doing too much. Now, I should mention I put a ton of firepower into the Farseer. I did deploy right next to him, so I was able to shoot him with both the Devouragons and the Trigon. I think I used it single-minded annihilation on just as like 6 Devouragons. Just put 18 more shots into the Farseer. Hopefully try to take him out. Unfortunately, I left him on 1 wound, so it would have been amazing to take out the Farseer. That takes Doom and Guide off the table for my opponent, and unfortunately the saves just weren't quite there for me. I tried to charge in with the monstrous creatures. The Hive Tyrant charged in on the Razor Wing right there. I rolled a 7 for the charge distance, obviously needing a 9 because he deep struck in. Went to reroll the 1 on my opponent, very wisely vected the command reroll. So that stopped the Hive Tyrant from getting in, and then obviously the Trigon was far enough away that he failed his charge as well. I won't go through the entire rest of the game. It was mostly mop-up at that point. I was able to take out 1 or 2 of the flyers with, the Carnifex shooting and random smites and everything like that. But my opponent was able to pretty easily sort of wipe through the rest of my team. I ended up with the Gene Stealers and the Tyranid Warriors in the building there, capping an objective, and I was able to almost wipe out all of my opponent's troops. I think he had 1 Ranger squad back left at the back. My other unit of Gene Stealers were able to wipe out a couple Ranger squads as well. My opponent was able to, drop into swooping hops, sweep out my small infantry like my Rippers and stuff like that. But I was able to score hold more on most of the turns of the game. So at the end of that game, my opponent being able to kill more, score line breaker, he ended up getting my Neurothrope, so got Slay the Warlord as well. He was able to score 8-5. So obviously, super bad matchup for me. I don't have a lot that can deal with those flyers. In hindsight, like I mentioned, I did make some mistakes, I believe, that could have helped me a lot. Leaving more models on the table would have helped me. I think I could still Jeep Strike the Trigon in and really make my opponent kind of, work that positioning and have to screen him out and prepare forewarned for when he comes in. But I should have left the Hive Tyrant and the Devouragons on the table. That forces my opponent to deal with those guys. If the Hive Tyrant's on the table, he's a 4+ invulnerable save. He's -1 to hit, and my opponent has to choose between shooting him and the Swarm Lord. I'm not sure that without the Scatter Laser Jet Bikes shooting, that my opponent can kill both of those units in 1 round. Especially since I can, hide them pretty far back. I can make him extend out to get Psychic Powers off the Farseer, put him in danger. If I hide those guys in the corner, potentially. My opponent, obviously, is going to have to move those flyers forward at some point, and the Hive Tyrant can take 1 out each turn, essentially. Still super happy that I was able to pull out, not a entirely one-sided game, and if the objective didn't, have kill more as that secondary in there, I think I would have been able to do a lot better. But that's the end of my round 1. I end up going down 5-8, like I said, and we're on to round 2. So round 2, I get to my table, and my opponent pulls out the biggest desk ornament I've ever seen in my life. Round 2, I played against Anthony, and he was playing a Taunar Supremacy suit in a Farsight Enclaves Tau list. So this was a super cool list, pretty fluffy. My opponent was just looking to blow models off the table, essentially. Playing the Supremacy suit, like I said, he had 2 units of stealth suits to add some anti-infantry in there, keep enemies from engaging the Supremacy suit. A couple units of shield drones, 1 Cold Star Commander, 2 Cadre Fireblades, as well as a unit of gun drones, Commander Firesight himself, as well as his Crisis Suit bodyguards in Deep Strike. Now, the scenario was Beachhead. I was feeling pretty good about the scenario, as long as I could survive the shooting from the Taunar, essentially. My opponent didn't have a lot in the way of board control. I was pretty sure I was going to be able to score the central objective most of the turns of the game, and that was going to, hopefully propel me to victory. My opponent had won the roll-off and chose to go first, so I deployed very conservatively. I had a lot. There was a forest actually under that mass of models in the center there. So I had every single one of my Gene Stealers inside the forest to get a cover save. Obviously, the Jormungandr troops all have cover saves all the time, as well as the -1 to hit, which I was really thankful for. And I deployed the Swarmlord sort of in the back there, so he wouldn't be quite as juicy a target. In hindsight, I think I could have deployed the Swarmlord behind the building on the top left, and then on the first turn run him behind the building in the center, so he actually wasn't a target at all during the game. But my opponent decided not to shoot at him anyway. So on his first turn, my opponent blitzed forward with his Cold Star Commander suit and actually called the Mount Ka, I think, is the strategy that lets the all the town units move and fire without penalty. And so everything sort of shifted around down the hill so they could see around that building there and have better lines of fire. So the Cold Star Commander ran up in the center of the table, close to the forest on the right-hand side. Got some shots off with his rocket pods, and the Taunar ended up blasted away at the warrior squad. Ended up killing 4 of them, I think, in one fell swoop. In response, that move was pretty aggressive of my opponent, so I was able to double wound one unit of Gene Stealers up, charge into the Cold Star Commander suit, take that out immediately. So that got me first strike, so I killed a unit on the first round. Was very happy about that, and got a Gene Stealer unit all up in my opponent's face. In response to killing the Cold Star, I think in hindsight what I should have done is use an overrun to pull those Gene Stealers back into cover in the center there. We treated the big dead dragon as a ruin, so it was going to give +1 cover if the whole unit was inside it. That would have helped out a little bit from my opponent's... the Taunar has a ton of anti-infantry shooting at very short range. That is 4 burst cannons and 4 missile systems, I think, so the cover wouldn't have helped a lot against that, but it would have helped against the burst cannons at least. Anyway, round 2, the fire base with the Taunar, stays stationary, doesn't have mod con anymore to move and shoot without penalty. And Commander Farsight himself and all his buddies drop in behind my lines. I didn't really have any units I wanted to pull back and screen. I figured if my opponent dropped, in the back behind there, I would have a unit of Gene Stealers that wasn't really going to do anything that could, go and deal with them. I also had my Winged Hive Tyrant as well as the Trigon and all his little buddies in reserve as well, so I wasn't super worried about that. Taunar opened up, vaporized the melee Carnifex, just, no chance for that guy. He just got blown up. All the little shots as well as the burst cannons off of the stealth suits totally obliterated the Gene Stealer squad that had killed the Cold Star Commander, and the Commander Firesight and his buddies all opened up into my Gene Stealer squad back in my deployment zone, ended up killing about half of them. My second turn was actually a long one. I had a lot of stuff going on. Obviously, I dropped in burrowed in the Trigon in the center there. He brought all of his little buddies with him inside that terrain to get cover. And then the Swarm Lord was able to run up to the Trigon and Hive Commander him to move right up to the Taunar. Now, I didn't really want to charge it. It would have gotten an enormous number of Overwatch shots, and probably... There's a non-zero chance that the Trigon just dies if it charges in, and my opponent gets a little lucky. So I decided to go for his Warlord, which was one of the Cadre Fireblades in the back. Now, he did make a mistake here. We know the scoring started around 2, and unfortunately, I didn't read the scenario very well. And you score at the start of your turn. I assumed it was the end of the battle round like the previous scenario had been. So, honestly, that's one of the reasons I don't really like the chapter-approved missions. They have some wonky special rules that are really unbalanced, but also, they all score differently, and it's very difficult to keep track of which one's which. So, I had 3 Gene Stealers remaining from the unit in the middle. They had Catalyst on them, and I rolled sort of an insane number of 5+ invulnerable saves as well as 5+ Feel No Pain. And I decided to Metabolic Overload them to run all the way around the tower there that's on the right-hand side and get onto my opponent's objective. Because my opponent doesn't have any troops choices, the Gene Stealers would have been objective secured, and I thought they were going to score me my opponent's objective, which is 3 victory points, which is a ton. Unfortunately, because you score at the start of your turn, those Gene Stealers would have to survive until my next turn. There's no chance of that happening. So that was a mistake on my part. The Gene Stealers could have just probably charged into something and then died. All of the Devourgaunts fired into the stealth teams there and ended up killing I think all but one of them left them on 1 wound. They were in cover, so I was -1 to hit. They were 2+ save. Probably not the best targets. I think I should have shot at the shield drones, if I'm honest, but I did take a couple of them out with single-minded annihilation. My Winged Hive Tyrant dropped in off-camera in my deployment zone to go deal with Commander Farsight. He failed to charge, but it was fine. And then everybody else charged into Farsight and his buddies and ended up killing a lot of them. The Trigon obviously moved up with the Swarm Lord's help. He went into... he charged the Cadre Fireblade. I think he got heroic intervention by the other Cadre Fireblade, which is really funny. The Cadre Fireblades together were able to score a wound on the Trigon, and the Trigon attacked my opponent's Warlord, did a ton of damage, all of which was saved by Savior protocols from the drones. So there was 1 unit of drones within range, and I think they saved 6 straight Feel No Pains. It was really strong. Fortunately, I had a pretty significant CP advantage, and I ended up blowing 3 CP to fight against the Trigon. Dealt the necessary wounds to kill his Warlord, scored Slay the Warlord, felt good about my day, even though I had to spend a ton of CPs and take a wound to kill 1 Cadre Fireblade. Now, back in my opponent's turn, Commander Farsight and his buddies all fell out of combat, did some shooting, ended up, I think, wiping out the remaining warrior, killing most of the Gene Stealers that were there. The Taunar actually moved up. Everybody fell back out of combat with the Trigon. The Taunar blasted it laser beamed it for an enormous number of damage, and charged into melee to kill it. Now, I did horror it with the Swarm Lord last turn, so it was -1 to hit, but I was able to take that out. One funny thing that happened, I think it might have happened in the previous turn, but he did fire all of its rail cannons into my Venom Cannon Carnifex. And the Carnifex is hiding around the building, so we were joking that he's being very sneaky. Between -1 hit from the horror and the Carnifex being -1 to hit innately, plus the 2+ armor save, he missed a bunch of times, got 1 wound through, then the Carnifex actually saved it. So Jormungandr coming through again. The Carnifex survived a round of shooting from the Taunar. It was very impressive. Now, obviously, wrapping up the game real quick here, my opponent didn't really have the firepower to take out all of my remaining units, so, all at once. I cleaned up Commander Farsight and all of his buddies there, and I was pretty convincingly on the rear objective and the central objective. My opponent, obviously, I didn't have enough to kill the Taunar. The Taunar was sitting on my opponent's objective, and contesting it didn't really do much for me. There's no margin of victory scoring or anything like that in this tournament. We were just going based off points, and so we called the game at this point, and we just scored it essentially based on what was remaining on the table and how we would score it out. So I ended up scoring First Strike, Slay the Warlord, and Linebreaker, all 3 secondaries, as well as capping the center objective and my objective for most of the game. So I was able to pull out a very convincing 12-5 victory and completed my objective of winning 1 game in the weekend. So I was feeling good after this game, felt like I had control of the game for most of it, and was feeling good going into the last round. So that brings me to the ultimate round, round 3. I had the pleasure of playing against one of the most beautifully painted armies I've played against in a miniatures game in recent memory. I played against Fernando and his Space Wolves and Imperial Knights combo. So Fernando had this, gorgeous army, everything painted up in sort of a Norse themes to tie the Imperial Knights and the Grey Knights together. He had wolf heads on his Armiger Helverins, and everything. The theme was on point. Everything was wonderful. What wasn't wonderful was the scenario we were playing, which is Narrow the Search. Now, for the people who don't know this mission, because, hopefully you don't play chapter-proof missions because it turns out they're awful. This mission puts 1 objective in the center. Fine, we're going to have a mosh pit. That sounds good. We got some Space Wolves, we got some Tyranids. It's kind of what we want to do. No big deal. The range to score the objective is shrinks every round. Also fine. Unfortunately, the objective is scored at the end of each battle round. You count the number of models that are within range of the objective, and whoever has more wins. Boom. You score the victory point for that round. First of all, that means that the second player can count how many models the opponent has in the zone, and then move that many +1 into the zone, and then they win every time. Also, there's a special rule that denies any model from taking an invulnerable save while it's within 12 inches of the objective. So we're trying to mosh pit in there, but unfortunately our best ways of surviving a mosh pit don't work. Now, for me, I have a lot of invulnerable saves. Obviously, I have the Gene Stealers. They do have an armor save. They have a little bit of protection, and usually they don't really save that much anyway, so I'm not super worried about it. The Hive Tyrants obviously really hate it, because if they don't have invulnerable saves, they're really easy to kill. But my opponent is playing Imperial Knight, which has the Relic, I believe, or a Warlord trait for a 4+ invulnerable save, and a bunch of Thunderwolf Cavalry, all with Storm Shields. So my opponent's entire list is based around taking invulnerable saves, and unfortunately, he can't take invulnerable saves in this scenario for the most part. So honestly, it's a really stupid rule. It doesn't really. I think the idea is that you're going to kill a lot of models. That's kind of the goal. But like a lot of times you don't remember. The times you do remember, it's crappy, and your important models are dying left and right, and it really is. It's just, it feels bad, especially for my opponent who has this gorgeous army and all these really cool models, all these Thunderwolf Cavalry and stuff. And he's, not taking invulnerable saves for him. Like, why? Why does that rule exist? Anyway, rant over. I'll talk about my opponent's list. Like I said, playing Space Wolves and Imperial Knights. He had a Knight Errant, the Thunderstrike Gauntlet, a big old thermal cannon on him there, as well as the missile launcher on the top there. He had 2 Armiger Helverins in that detachment as well, so that made it the full-on super heavy detachment. So he was able to get the extra command points and the house trait and everything like that. The Space Wolves had 3 5-man Grey Hunter squads, all with plasma guns. Pretty strong, just a shooting base. Fernando had said he put them in the list just to, play this scenario, so he had some extra bodies to throw in the middle there if he needed to. He also had 2 units of 3 Thunderwolf Cavalry with Thunder Hammers and Storm Shields. So very cool to see these guys on the table. They are real scary, especially when they're backed up with my opponent's characters. So he had a Wolf Lord on a Thunderwolf, Thunder Hammer, Storm Shield, the whole 9 yards. And he also had a little Smash Captain, a Battle Leader, I think, the guy who rerolls ones, with a jump pack as well. On top of that, he had 2 Contempt Tempter Dreadnoughts with Frost Axes, which was super cool. He used those guys to body block for the Helverins. I won the roll to go first and chose to go second. Now, we had the Frontline Assault deployment map, so we had sort of Dawn of War with a pointy spearhead in the middle. I deployed sort of a little bit far back with my Carnifexes up front. Now, obviously, the Carnifexes, like, I don't really care if they get shot at. Like, they're -1 to hit, they're 2+ armor save. Besides the thermal cannon on the Imperial Knight there, there's not a ton that punches through heavy armor. The Helverins are, -1. They're not super good at it. And so if my opponent wanted to waste a bunch of time shooting Carnifexes, like, I was fine with that. He's not shooting at the Swarmlord. He's not shooting at the Winged Hive Tyrant. So, like, whatever. Go ahead and shoot my dudes. That's fine. Winged Hive Tyrant obviously is behind those statues there to actually get a cover save, which is very exciting. And my Genestealers deployed sort of out on the flanks, hiding behind things so my opponent's infantry squads didn't rain shots down on them and kill them. The first turn is actually very interesting. Both my opponent and I try to stay out of 12 inches of the central objective there because the -1 or the no invulnerable save bubble was going to be really hurtful to us because of, we both had relatively heavy shooting. My opponent had a unit of Thunderwolf Cavalry that moved out, sort of ranging wide on the left flank there, and the Knight moved out on the right-hand side. Now, my opponent's shooting wasn't great. He focus fired in on the melee Carnifex between the thermal cannon on the Knight as well as the Helverin autocannons. They were able to rip that guy down off the table and kill him. In my turn, my opponent's Thunderwolf Cavalry were kind of a juicy target. I wasn't sure how survivable they were going to be, but I decided to take some shots at them anyway. So the Warriors and the Carnifex moved up to take some shots at those guys, and I ended up rolling very well. I believe I also rolled a Psychic Scream and a Smite off of the Swarmlord and killed 2 of them. That was huge. A Venom Cannon, I think, did some wounds, and then the Brainless Devourer Carnifex was able to finish off the last one. I put some shots into the Thunderwolf Cavalry in the back. I think I might have killed one, but it wasn't a big deal. But the thing was, I did score first strike, so that was huge. Able to get that objective, and my opponent put his entire army inside the center there. And like I was saying before, going second is a big deal in this objective because I'm able to put that many models +1 into the middle in order to score the objective for the turn. So my opponent decided not to sit back and get shot at. He sort of realized that between the double Venom cannons, as well as all of the sort of incidental shooting I had from the Warriors and the Carnifexes, sort of outshot him a little bit, even with those Helverins there doing a ton of damage every turn. So he decided to push really far in and just get as much done as possible, hopefully cripple my army with an alpha before I was able to do anything. So he went in with the Knight Errant there into the center. Unfortunately for him, fired his thermal cannon, rolled a 1 for shots, CP rerolled it into a 1 again. He I think had already used his strategy to ignore penalties to hit. So he was able to shoot at I think I horrored him as well, so he was -1 to hit all the time. So he ignored that and was able to ignore the Spore Cysts on the Carnifexes, fired into Carnifex, I think hit with his thermal cannon with his 1 shot, and then failed to wound. It was just a really depressing turn of shooting from the Knight. The missiles didn't really do much. The Heavy Stubber, I think, killed a Genestealer. It's really sad. And he did move into the center there, so he didn't get any vulnerable save anymore. The Thunderwolf Cavalry broke cover, charged up into the middle gloriously, threw some grenades at people, did some damage, went to charge the Warriors, and then failed to charge. The Battle Leader did get the charge, and between the Battle Leader and the Imperial Knight, my opponent was able to wipe out the entire Warrior unit. From there, the jaws sort of closed on my opponent's army. The no invulnerable save bubble really hampered him, as I was able to get a unit of Genestealers into the Thunderwolf Cavalry and the Lord. Between shooting and the Genestealer attacks, I think I wiped out all of them, both the Thunderwolf Cavalry and the Lord. I was able to get a Paroxysm off on the Imperial Knight, so my opponent couldn't interrupt with it to take out units before it got taken out. It took some incidental damage from Smites and Psychic Screams and shooting, but between the Genestealers, the Carnifex, and the Hive Tyrant, I was able to kill the Knight. The Knight was also the Warlord, so I got Slay the Warlord, as well as swamping the center of the table and scoring the objective for turn 2 as well. Now, my opponent, coming back in, charged up with all the Grey Hunter squads. He did have a lot of melee weapons in those units, as well as all of the plasma guns. Plus the Space Wolves, a bonus of getting an additional attack every time a +1 to hit every time they charge, was pretty effective. He did also have a Rune Priest, I don't think I mentioned, on a Thunderwolf as well. And those moved in to attack the Genestealer unit in the center, did an enormous number of damage, killed almost the entire Genestealer unit, left 2 alive. From there, I brought my reserves in on turn 3, so the Trigon popped up in the center, as well as all of his Devourer buddies. They used single-minded annihilation, fired twice into all the Grey Hunters, ended up dealing an enormous number of damage, taking a ton of them out. And from there, it was mostly cleanup, unfortunately. The Contemptor Dreads, stood a little bit without their invulnerable save. They took a ton of damage from Gene Stealers. Brought the other squad, to pretty low hit points, but the Swarmlord was able to come in and finish those guys off. And one of the Helverins even got taken down by shooting. Unfortunately, my opponent used the Rotate Ion Shields and failed all of his 4+ invulnerables with that guy as well. So just poor dice for my opponent throughout the entire game. And the scenario stupid rules really screwing his army over. My opponent obviously trying to build a list, not necessarily for this one tournament. I think the list he's building for a different event and just had it to play with. So really just terrible luck that he had to play on this objective. It was really rough for him. So he was a good sport the entire time. He obviously played well, just had a crap hand to be dealt with. That did give me a very convincing, I believe, 9-1 score to round out the day. So if we're keeping track, that means that I won 2 of my games. Very exciting. I doubled my objective and lost to a very good player who ended up going undefeated on the day. So I didn't feel bad about the first round loss at all. Obviously, my list wasn't particularly tuned for that matchup. I think coming back into it, I have a lot more experience now and could probably give my opponent a little bit of run for his money. I also, I think, tanked my opponent's score for that first round. He actually didn't place very highly because I was able to bring that game pretty closely. Obviously, feel kind of bad for him, but also yay! It played out our flyers, kind of up to a standstill. Anyway, it was an awesome experience. I really enjoyed this first tournament. I did wish it was ITC or a different mission format, but the missions, they're okay. They're just not great. Especially, I think Beachhead is pretty balanced and very fun. The 4 pillars is a little complicated and weird, but it's okay, I guess. Just the third mission really sort of left a sour taste in my mouth. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this battle report. I guess a couple thoughts, coming out of it. In terms of my list, I wasn't sure what to do with this list. I had a similar list, obviously lined up, but couldn't play with the Hive Guard. Ended up really falling in love with this list, actually. I hadn't played Jormungandr before this tournament, and the bonus, the +1 cover save, is insanely powerful. As you can see in my reports, every single game that came into play at least once and kept Carnifexes alive way longer than they should have. I didn't mention, but also it affects the warriors too. So they're a 3+ save just standing there getting shot at, which is not great, but it's pretty good, especially against small arms fire, bolters and stuff like that. The Tyranid Prime is a 2+ save. Because he starts at a 3+ base, so sometimes when he's getting shot at, he just doesn't die. He's also 6 wounds, so that's pretty impressive. I almost want to put the Swarmlord in there, so it's a 2+ save as well, but then it can't double move the Kraken units, and I think I want those guys to be in Kraken. But super excited about the list. I love the Jormungandr detachment, and I think I'm going to stick that around. Still have some tweaks to make, and I think you guys will see that in a future video. But I hope you guys enjoyed this report. I had a great time playing in the tournament, and I'm super looking forward to more tournaments in the future. And you guys can look forward to some more tournament reports as I get to play more games. Anyway, have a nice time. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Do all those YouTube things, and have a wonderful day, everybody.